If there's anything the last video taught me, is that many of you are running some seriously mismatched memory configurations. And it all stems because of the discussion we had regarding 24 gigabytes of RAM in Nick's old build. So at least that triggered a video for us to make today. We are gonna take some makes sense and doesn't make sense types of memory configs where we're gonna see whether or not you're trading off performance for capacity. And if you are trading off performance, just how much? And then what happens when you mismatch the capacity and you have different channels with different amounts of RAM in there? So today we're gonna kind of play around with this for the sake of science to see what happens. With no parts markup and only a $75 build fee, Redux gaming PCs are the obvious choice for gamers who demand the best without paying extra. With as little as a few clicks, you'll get a PC optimized for you and the games you play at a price that fits your budget, and all Redux PCs are backed by a 2-year warranty. To see all that Redux has to offer and to start configuring your next PC, head to the link in the description below. All right, so a couple of spec notes here. We're running our 10900K on our motherboard. We have a 3080. The reason for that is we're looking for any sort of, we want a high FPS situation here where if any sort of memory bottleneck starts to happen with the weird configs, we'll see it in gaming. Test bench or test suite, we're gonna use 3D Mark. I'm gonna do TimeSpy regular. I was gonna use Firestrike, but the test just takes too long to do Firestrike. So we're gonna do TimeSpy normal, not extreme. We don't want it to be as much GPU bound as we're trying to see CPU effects. Our 10900K is locked to 5 gigahertz all core. And the reason why we're doing that is we don't want to have it doing any sort of auto Intel algorithm in terms of turbo timers and some of the logic on boost clocks and how they respond. We just want them locked at 5 gigs so we have a nice static scenario to really measure the changes that are happening between our different configs. Our memory, the Trizent D. So our Trident Z memory here is 3200 megahertz. It's the CL16, 18, 18, 38 at 1.35 volts. So that's our baseline here. First test we're doing right now though, is we are going to be doing this with our XMP profile off, because I just want to see what some of the differences are between XMP off and on. If you want to check your memory settings and know exactly what's happening with your CPU with anything to do with your system regarding CPU, memory, motherboard, all that sort of stuff, you can go download CPU-Z. It's completely free. And we're currently running XMP on. And the reason why I can tell is the DRAM frequency says 1600 megahertz. DDR stands for double data rate, which means it's that number times 2. So 3200 megahertz is what the XMP is, which means I need to go in here real quick and I need to turn off XMP. That way we can get a true baseline. So we're using Cinebench R20. Doesn't matter what version you used, 15, 20, or 23. We're just looking for a baseline. This is our first number so we can see how things improve, change, get worse, or whatever from here. So while this is running, I want to talk about something real quick. Memory is one of those kind of a taboo discussion, only that there are so many different variations of memory. There's different RAM timings. You can have the same frequency, different timings in the same brand. Different workloads use memory in different ways. So it's one of those things where everyone's use case on how RAM is going to affect them is going to be different. I mean, if you are a video editor, or you're working on photography or something in a professional environment, you are gonna want the most RAM possible, where you'll find that RAM speed, especially for video or photo editing, is not gonna be as important because you're dealing with one frame of work that you're dealing with there. Unlike video, which has to store a ton of stuff in the cache and in the memory, take all of this with a grain of salt. We're literally just trying to see what the results are based on some of the stuff that people were saying in our last video. But our baseline right now is a 6,217. Ignore that score right there. I'm not gonna tell you what I was doing on that one. But 6,217. Now, to be honest, if you're curious, we were making sure we were locking down our CPU and getting results kind of figured out before we start playing around with memory, because ASUS's implementation of XMP versus CPU overclocks and stuff is not good in our opinion. So we were just doing some testing. All right, 6,217 on our CPU. This is XMP off. We can tell again if we go and look at our GPU-Z. And I'm only showing you this once. I'm not gonna do this every time. We're just gonna tell you what changes we made and what the results are. But if we go back to GPU-Z or CPU-Z and look, 1066 times 2, 1066.5 times 2 is gonna get us our 2133, which is the base frequency for DDR4. Now you'll find a lot of RAM sticks that would default in 2400. That started later on. Buying 2133 megahertz sticks these days is very difficult because the progression of RAM is now like well into the 3000s in terms of being affordable and cheap and easy to manufacture. Okay, so our timeline baseline here. We're just gonna use graphics score and CPU score. I don't really care about the combined. So our baseline here, obviously, graphics score is at 18,874, which is not bad at all, because it's a 3080, obviously. And then our CPU is an 11,833, which is not bad, but not absolutely amazing, because again, Intel, mainstream. First thing we need to do now, enable XMP. This isn't the discussion that took place on the other video. It's just, I just want to show you guys why the XMP functionality is so important, because if you, any stick of RAM you buy and you put it in your system, unless you turn on XMP, you're not getting the speeds that are advertised, because that's an overclock. Anything over 2133 is an overclock for your RAM, and you have to turn it on. It's not on by default. So I just want to show people the amount of uplift you're going to see in performance just by clicking one button in your BIOS. Well, it's a toggle, not really a click, but you know what I'm saying. So by clicking that one button, it's going to be toggling. It went from a 6217 to a 6391. That's more of an improvement, not just from the frequency, but the timings more so. The lower the timings, the better the performance usually, because it has everything to do with throughput and bandwidth of the memory. And there's a formula you can use, which is like 2,000 times, yeah. That's besides the point here. It's a formula we've used when we try and figure out which RAM we're gonna use when we're doing the XOC stuff, because we want the fastest RAM possible, not the most RAM possible. So it's one of those factors that we think about. But that's a few percentage points there, obviously, from just turning on the RAM and getting the advertised speeds that you're paying for. So did that have any difference on our graphics test? So that's what's next. So graphics score really didn't change. I mean, it's within margin of error. So an 18,940, that's a slight uplift from an 18,874. Our CPU score though was a significant increase, 13,390 versus a 11,833. Yeah, that's significant, just from XMP. So you can see, this is why we're also using 3D Mark, because we can see tangibly what's happening with the CPU score and the GPU score together. Cinebench is just another metric that we're using here. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to think of some scenarios here. Right now, we've got two matched sticks of RAM in dual channel. This is a 4-DIMM motherboard, which means you can have two slots per channel, allowing you to double the capacity. When it comes to overclocking and stuff, just a side note, the best latency you're gonna get with your RAM setup is having one stick per channel, not two, having them split like that. That's a capacity thing, it's not a speed thing. In fact, you'll find that the best overclocking motherboards on the planet feature one DIMM slot per channel. So actually, you know, I'm not gonna take these out. So here's our next scenario. Actually, before I do that, I need to go back into the BIOS and I need to disable XMP, otherwise whatever I stick in there is gonna try and boot XMP. The motherboard should be smart enough to recognize that there was a change, like, hey, wait a minute. There was only 16 gigs, now there's more here. We should probably revert back to defaults. That way we don't try and load maybe a 3600 megahertz profile onto a 2400 megahertz DIMM, and that's clearly not gonna boot. This board doesn't do that. So here's what we're gonna do next. We are going to go ahead and I'm gonna say, funky scenario here. We got ourselves two more sticks of G.Skill RAM. They're non-RGB, and they're 3000 megahertz instead of 3200, but they're slightly tighter timings. CL15, 15, 15, 35 versus the 16, 18, 18, 38. So what should happen here right now is when we put these RAM sticks in, if we enable the XMP, which it should work, it should default everything in here to the slowest RAM that's installed. So if you had 4 different sticks and you're trying to enable some sort of fast RAM function, it should default them all to whatever the slowest RAM stick is in there. So as you can see, in terms of RAM, we have 32 gigabytes of RAM. Default back to 2133 because I undid the XMP. So what happens if I hit XMP? See, it defaulted all of them to the 3000, 50, 50, 15, 35, which is our slowest RAM stick in there. So now we're gonna run those same tests again with mismatched RAM speeds and timings, but same capacity sticks. So you guys saw it booted just fine with just having all the defaults, right? No XMP or anything like that. Now that we have stuck in, well, after like 7 boot loops, it finally stuck on D6, which is a memory thing. So trying to enable the XMP so that the faster RAM would run at the slower RAM speed, not so much a problem, except for the fact that CL15 is not running on the 3600. because that's a much tighter timing. So you could typically find that you can slow down RAM and it will run tighter timings, but not always. What's happening is the memory controller is just saying, okay, you Trident ZRGB, this is what we're gonna do. And it's either gonna cooperate or it's not. So I've just cleared the CMOS. It'll probably go through a couple times and relearn again. So what we're gonna do this time is we are going to manually set the frequency, but we're not gonna change the timings because as you just saw, the 3600 will not run with those timings. This might lead people to think too, sometimes you bought some extra RAM and you stuck it in there and you weren't paying attention because they could look exactly the same here, but the timings and the speeds might be different, which I mean, the only way you can tell they're different is by looking at the sticker. And you put it in and suddenly your system doesn't want to boot and you think something's broken. So we're set to 3000, remember it's 1500 times 2. Our clocks are 17, 18, 18, 36. So you can see it's significantly slower for the red RAM to be running at these defaults than it is for the faster RAM. Remember, as RAM frequency increases, the timings tend to loosen. Some of the RAMs kits that are really, really expensive out there, like like these guys right here, for instance, these Crucial Ballistics, DDR4 4400, or even these guys right here. These are the, what, 5600 megahertz DIMMs, or 56, yeah, something like that. 5100. These have timings of 19, 25, 26, 48. So that's where you start to, it really depends on your workload, whether or not the timings or the speed is important, because although it's really fast at 5100, the timings are super loose to do it. And if you do the math configuration on that calculation that shows you what your actual bandwidth of your memory is, sometimes slowing it down, but increasing and slowing down the timings is actually more performance. So it really depends. So we had a 6391, now we're 6409. So that really is margin of error, because of the fact that you can run this test 5 times and get it to fluctuate 1%, 2%, either way. So it's looking like the couple of clock speed differences wasn't really important, at least not when it came to Cinebench. But you saw we had some significant changes in CPU with 3D Mark, especially with the physics score. So we'll see what happens now. I'm not gonna see much, I don't think much of a change is gonna happen here. All right, so CPU score, wow, holy crap. Okay, so that went up to 14,043 from a 13,390. So our original score was an 11,833, then a 13,390 by just enabling XMP. And then our graphics score went from an 18,940 to an 18,896, still completely within that margin of error. So I'm now gonna just pull out 1 stick of RAM. We now have 24 gigs, but we have 3 sticks of RAM in there. 2 occupying channel A, 1 occupying channel B. This is a scenario where you might have an old PC that, I don't want to say old, but another PC that you're taking parts from, or maybe somebody gave you a free stick of RAM. You're like, hey, cool, I'll put some more RAM in there and just stick it in. But let's go and take a look at what happened now to the RAM in the system when it comes to GPU-Z or CPU-Z. You can get away with some of these mismatched combos better than you could back in the day, especially with older like Intel and AMD stuff, is you can have a non-even, like an asymmetrical setup here with your channels. For instance, I have an 8 GB stick in channel B, and I have 2 8 GB sticks in channel A. One is a 3200 megahertz DIMM, one is a 3000 megahertz DIMM. And if we look at CPU-Z, you can see we are still in dual channel. This was not always the case. It would default to single channel in the past, and then just combine all the capacities and then go to the lowest common denominator, and that's what you got. So things have definitely improved. What we want to see now, though, is what, I don't have a prediction on this one. I've never run this config, because I always run a symmetrical setup. I've always matched the channels exactly the same. So I don't have a prediction on this one. I kind of want to say Cinebench will be the same. 3D Mark will be somewhere in between where the good test was with 4 sticks and the good test was with 2 sticks. That's my prediction, which seems like a safe one. That's our highest score at Cinebench yet. It's a 6420. What? How?
This RAM has it out for you today.
Every test I've done, it's gone up. And the thing is, we technically took out a stick, made it an asymmetrical channel setup. I don't know how Cinebench accesses RAM. So I have to predict that a 3D Mark performance drop is going to happen because of the way we saw it scale with four sticks of RAM. There we go. We're back down to essentially where we were. Yeah, we're still slightly faster than we were when we just did the matched XMP dual sticks with the Trident Z. All right, so our graphics score finally came down a little bit too. So 18,853 for the graphics. Again, still margin of error because before we were 18,896, 18,940, 18,874. So graphics virtually untouched by this particular test case. Remember, guys, your results are going to vary, your mileage may vary because of obviously different test suites are going to have different impacts. We're just kind of showing here on a couple of randomly picked things what's happening here. Our CPU came down to a 13,483 from a 14,043. So we lost 640 points by taking out the one RAM stick. There's only one logical way to end this. Mythbuster style. No, we're not going to blow it up. We're not going to call out the bomb squad to get them to, oversee this. No. I need to actually go back into the BIOS and reset the speed. We are going to put a different manufacturer and speed stick in every single slot. We're going to put in one stick of ballistics. We're going to put in one stick of older school Dominator. That's at 3,000. The ballistics is 2,400 megahertz. So far this is going to be our lowest common denominator here. We'll put in one stick of random Sniper X. That's a 3,600. And then we'll grab a Corsair. What is this? Is that DDR? No, you know what? This is too nice. This is too nice. Sorry, Corsair. You got two sticks here represented. We're gonna go ahead and go even farther down the budget hole. We are going Patriot. 2,400 megahertz, basic brand. I'm surprised it even has a heat spreader, Patriot. We figured what better to do this with than a $400 stick of ballistics 5,100 megahertz RAM. We now have a single stick of RAM that's as much as a former basic build. The most basic DDR4 I've ever purchased, a Sniper X and an old Dom Plat. So what could go wrong? Oh no, I went back to, so we have 28 gigs of RAM. Yeah, we have 28 gigs of RAM. Because I should have replaced the 8 with another 4 to get 20.
By the way, we still have weird. This is running 28 gigs of RAM. Sound off in the comments.
Who's running 18 gigs of RAM? Any 2 gigabyte fams out there?
I want to see somebody with an odd number of gigabytes. That'd be amazing.
17?
Yeah, 17 gigs.
Because a chip died. So I now have it set to 2,400 megahertz because this ballistics is running less than half its rated speed. I swear to God, if this is a faster setup, it's a Honda Fit with a compound twin turbo bi-supercharger. So it goes supercharger, feeding a small turbo, feeding a bigger supercharger, feeding a bigger turbo. It booted though, that's awesome, I love it. It just goes to show how modern motherboards are just like, you know what, fine. I want to see what happens too. DDR4, 28 gigabytes, running 2,400. What the frick? It's the fastest setup.
Look at it. Look at it.
I don't want to look.
This is what peak performance looks like.
So the memory though, or the timings, this is why it's so fast. 15, 15, 15, 36. What's funny is I took the G.Skill Neo out, not the Neo, but the standard RGB. This is the one that wouldn't run those timings. Apparently every stick I stuck in apparently has tighter timings than that G.Skill, which is why we're seeing this uplift. This really is a demonstration of timing and how important it is rather than capacities or the overall memory speed. This is 2,400 megahertz. We had 3,200 in there. Okay, I don't know what to expect with 3D Mark. Maybe it'll land somewhere between the 32 gig mismatched, which was the fastest setup, and then this, I don't know. Regardless of what it does on the GPU score and stuff right now, this is basically that episode of The Office where they went to the gay bar trivia night, and then Kevin and Meredith and Kelly and all of them were on a random team because of the fact that nobody wanted them on their team and they ended up winning. That's what this is. Okay, that's slower than our 2 sticks of Trident Z RGB with XMP on. That's 16 gigabytes right there. Then it was beaten But it was faster than these same two sticks with 2133 base clock. It was slower than everything else by a considerable amount. So in a test like that, where memory actually matters and it's accessed, it does have a negative effect there. 18,846 on the memory, or on the GPU. We had an 18,853 prior. So all the GPU scores are within a margin of error. What does that mean for the results of this? If capacity is important, like photo editing, stuff like that, we got big image caches that you're trying to bring in, then I would go with the most memory you can cram in there, whether they're matched or not. Because remember, right now we're running 2400 megahertz. We could get that score to come up if I could run them faster. The timings seem to be the only thing that matter these days when it comes to memory. And I think it's finally time that we do a video where we talk about timings. A lot of the tuning time we do when we do the XOC stuff on LN2 and whatnot is a lot of memory-based tuning, which is hard to say, trying to get every single one of those particular sub-timings set just right. There is a diminishing return where sometimes getting the memory clock to go as fast as possible, but then having to loosen up the timings gives you a lower score or lower performance metric than if you were to find, like I said, the intersect of where timing and memory speed cross. That intersect is the sweet spot. That's where you're gonna get the best performance. From there, it's a diminishing return on something, which brings down the overall score. Do I recommend this setup? No. But do I know that not everybody has the ability to go out there and have 4 sticks of matched RAM? Or maybe you bought RAM back when DDR4 first came out, 2015, 14, whatever it was. And then suddenly you go to buy more RAM and that RAM's long gone. You gotta buy another set. Well, I guess if you have 2 matched sticks and then another 2 matched sticks and you do 1 of each per channel, that's fine. But as you can see, on something like Cinebench, I think Cinebench was just trolling us. But at the end of the day, I expected to do this video and show you guys like, look, this is why you don't do the thing you all are telling me you're doing in the other video when it comes to RAM, because that's stupid. Well, apparently I'm stupid because it was better in a lot of, in Cinebench, and then some of the mismatched stuff was still faster than the matched stuff that was at its fastest speeds. What I still can't explain that. But at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't matter as long as the score shows that there's a benefit to having more RAM, whether it's matched or not. If you can get the timings tighter, that's the ultimate thing that matters right there. And it just happened to be that all of these RAM sticks right here have faster timings than the Trident Z that I had in there originally. So I know I'm gonna be changing the RAM on this test bench now. All right guys, time to go. Thanks for watching this video. Sound off down below what your weird memory configuration is. Have you actually tested different memory configs in your system and found that having some weird mismatched system was ironically the faster setup for you? Sound off down below. You just saw our experiences with it, and we'll see you guys in the next one. And go ahead and just rip me apart in the comments down there. I'm not gonna read them.